The council chamber was massive, an imposing structure that reflected the vastness of the galaxy itself. Its walls were made of shimmering obsidian glass, through which distant stars flickered like tiny embers scattered across the night sky. A gigantic hologram of the galaxy's sectors rotated in the center of the room, casting multicolored glows across the faces of the representatives. The holograms were silent. There was no music or ambiance, just the cool hum of the station's systems working tirelessly to maintain a perfect equilibrium. At the center of the chamber stood General Kale, the sole representative of humanity in this otherwise alien-dominated assembly. His posture was perfect, shoulders back and hands clasped behind his back. His eyes, sharp and calculating, didn't waver. The weight of the moment was heavy, but Kyle was a master of concealing emotion. His calmness was both reassuring and dangerous, a paradox that radiated power in every direction. Humanity had spent centuries being considered irrelevant. They had scraped their way into space, their influence on the galactic stage negligible at best. But Earth had a secret. Kale, standing in front of the Confederation's assembled leaders, knew that secret wasn't just in their technology. It was in the way humans could bend the rules of power. They didn't need to wield it recklessly. They could hold it. And that was the most dangerous power of all. "We are here to show you something you've never seen before," Kyle's voice cut through the silence. It was deep and clear, cutting the air with the precision of a blade. His words were not a request, they were a statement. "We are not here to beg for your favor or to argue our way into your galactic order. We're here because we have something. More than technology, we have the ability to choose restraint when we could destroy." The Confederation's representatives, an array of alien species, each more ancient and powerful than humanity, shifted uneasily in their seats. The Arcturian Chancellor, sitting at the far end of the table, leaned forward. His pale blue skin shimmered with rippling energy patterns as his many eyes narrowed. The Arcturians were feared for their efficiency and their calculating nature. Their entire society had been built on the principle of domination through precision. To hear a human speak of restraint instead of action, it was beyond comprehension. Restraint? The Arcturian Chancellor's voice was a low rumble, tinged with incredulity. "You are talking about power, General. Power is action. Power is control." Kale's gaze didn't falter. He held the Chancellor's gaze for a moment longer than most would dare. "That is where you are wrong, Chancellor." His words were soft but heavy. True power is not wielded in every moment. It is controlled, measured. Power used without thought leads to chaos. It's a force that spirals out of control, and the cost is higher than you can imagine. There was a slight pause as the Confederation leaders exchanged quiet glances. The silence in the room was thick. Kyle could see it now. Doubt, curiosity, and even fear creeping into the eyes of the powerful beings around the table. They had long judged humanity as unworthy of being a threat. But the general wasn't just asserting a new form of strength. He was asserting that humanity's value went beyond the confines of their technological development. They had something that the Confederation lacked: restraint. "You speak as if you have learned some great lesson," the Chancellor replied with a sneer, his voice dripping with mockery. "But what lesson is that, General? How is it that the humans, a species with no intergalactic history, no true power beyond their weapons, suddenly stand here in this chamber, speaking to us about control? You have nothing to offer." Kyle allowed the words to sink in, then gave a single, barely perceptible shake of his head. "You misunderstand, Chancellor." Kyle's voice lowered. "We have learned not from our weapons, but from the mistakes we've made. Mistakes that could have destroyed us. Humanity has survived because we understood the cost of excessive power. We chose to learn from our history, to evolve not through domination, but through understanding. The room was still now, each leader processing the weight of Kyle's words. Even the Varelian ambassador, usually aloof and detached, seemed to be pondering the implications. The Varelians were a species of extreme logic and intellect, valuing calculated decision-making above all else. They would never act without carefully measuring every possibility. Their reputation for cold, detached analysis made them the most feared diplomats in the galaxy. Yet even Velira, the Varelian ambassador, leaned slightly forward, her crystalline blue eyes narrowing in subtle intrigue. Understanding. Velira's voice was calm, her tone deceptively neutral. What does that mean, General? Understanding of what? Of consequences, Ambassador, Kyle replied, the edge in his voice sharp now, as if the moment had passed where diplomacy could soften the message. Of the long-term cost of unchecked power. You think you can rule through domination, but the real strength lies in knowing when to hold back. You're not the first empire to rise to power, and you won't be the last, but there are lessons to be learned from the past. Some of the most powerful empires in galactic history have crumbled because they failed to recognize this. They thought that their strength would carry them forever, but it didn't. There was a stirring among the representatives. Some exchanged hesitant glances, others shifted in their seats uncomfortably. It was a subtle change, but it was there. A shift in the way they were perceiving the human delegation. The Arcturian Chancellor, ever the pragmatist, took a deep breath, and his voice softened slightly. So, you wish to prove that you are different, that you have learned something. No one else has, but do you think the galaxy will give you a place based on such idealism? There is only one thing that matters in the end: who has the power to act and who can be relied upon to act when necessary. Kyle stepped forward now, his presence filling the room. The calm, measured energy he projected wasn't the result of confidence alone. It was the result of deep conviction. You're right, Chancellor, Kyle said. The galaxy is a brutal place, and power is what ultimately wins wars. But what happens when the strongest empire grows complacent, when the most powerful fleets stop measuring their moves? When a species or a government stops caring about restraint, the galaxy becomes a battlefield. But humanity is different. We know the true cost of power, and we know the value of choosing when to use it. That is the power we offer. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. We offer you a partnership, a way forward, not through fear, but through trust. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. No one spoke. Even the hum of the room's systems seemed to quiet. The Arcturian Chancellor sat back in his chair, rubbing his chin in contemplation. The Varelian ambassador's sharp gaze softened just a fraction. The others, the representatives from the various galactic species, watched in stunned silence. Finally, the Chancellor broke the stillness, his voice quieter now, tinged with something approaching respect. You have our attention, General. Kale, but actions speak louder than words. Kale's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. Then let us show you, Chancellor. Let us show you why humanity is worth respecting. The air in the chamber was thick, charged with anticipation. What had once been a sterile, neutral setting for discussions of galactic governance had shifted. Now, it was a place where the stakes were higher than ever before. The words spoken in this room wouldn't just affect the immediate future. They could very well change the balance of power in the galaxy itself. General Kyle stood at the center, his posture perfect, unwavering. He was surrounded by representatives from across the Confederation, species as old as the stars themselves, each with their own agenda, their own interpretation of what the galaxy should be. But now, in the presence of humanity, those agendas had started to shift. The Confederation had always prided itself on its stability. The established order had worked for millennia, and the races that formed it had long since learned that power was the key to maintaining that order. But now, humanity was offering something entirely new, a power that didn't come from destruction or expansion, but from restraint. The mere concept was anathema to everything the Confederation had built. We're gathered here today because you, General Kyle, have promised something extraordinary. The Varelian ambassador Valera began, her icy blue gaze never leaving him. Humanity claims to have mastered the one thing the Confederation has failed to achieve. But claims are easy to make, General. We need proof. There was a ripple of murmurs in the room. The Arcturian Chancellor leaned forward slightly, his sharp features betraying a flicker of interest. His people had long been known for their technological prowess, and the concept of instant communication, a technology their best minds had only dreamed of, was a tantalizing mystery. Kyle met Valera's eyes with a steady calm that seemed to settle over the room. He knew what was at stake. What he was about to do wasn't just a demonstration of technology, it was a statement, a challenge to the Confederation's assumptions. The galaxy's great powers might no longer be able to dismiss humanity as an insignificant species clinging to survival. With a single motion, Kyle reached behind him and pulled a small, unassuming device from the table. It was no more than a sleek, silver cube, smooth to the touch, its surface reflecting the light. Like polished chrome, a simple thing, nothing to suggest the vast potential contained within. The Confederation, Kyle's voice rang out clearly, drawing the attention of every delegate, has long relied on quantum entanglement to communicate across the vast distances of space. But there's a problem with your technology. It's slow. It's inefficient, it requires immense amounts of energy, and it's limited by distance. Humanity, however, has modified it. We've perfected it. And this, he held up the device, is proof of that. The silence in the room grew thick. No one dared to speak, all eyes now fixed on the small cube in Kyle's hands. Could it be possible? Had humanity truly managed to break the laws of physics that the Confederation had spent eons trying to understand? Kyle, ever composed, activated the device. There was a soft hum as the cube powered on. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. But then, in an instant, a figure appeared in the air before them, flickering slightly at first, but then solidifying into a perfect projection. The hologram was of a human soldier, his uniform identical to Kale's. His expression was resolute, his eyes steely with the focus of someone trained for war. Yet what shocked the delegates was the detail. It was as if the soldier was standing right there in the room with them, his form flawless, despite the vast distance between Earth and the council chamber. "This is Captain Serena Davis," Kyle announced, his voice unwavering. "She is stationed on Earth, on the front lines of humanity's defense. And as you can see," he motioned to the soldier, who was now standing at attention, "she is speaking to you now. No delay, no distortion." The room was still. Shocked gasps echoed through the chamber as the gravity of what they were witnessing sank in. The Varelians, known for their intellectual prowess, exchanged glances, and even the normally unflappable Arcturian Chancellor leaned back, his arms folded tightly over his chest. This was something they had never seen before. "Captain Davis," Kale said, his tone steady but now laced with a certain pride, "is hundreds of light years away. But she is speaking with you here, now. No limitations, no latency." Captain Davis's voice crackled through the air. "Greetings, Council. I'm Captain Serena Davis of the United Earth Forces. You're no doubt wondering how this is possible. Let me assure you—" Her voice cut off abruptly. There was no interference or sudden glitch. It was intentional. Kyle raised a hand, silencing the room. "We've also built in an emergency fail-safe." His voice had a bite to it, a chilling calm that made the air seem colder. "We are aware that some may question the potential dangers of such power. How can the Confederation trust us if we hold this ability? In that moment, the hologram of Captain Davis flickered. Her figure distorted and, to the shock of all present, was replaced by a violent image, a simulation of a star collapsing in on itself, its fiery core imploding, sending out waves of destruction. "This," Kyle said, his voice almost a whisper, "is the result of a misuse of this technology, a catastrophic failure. And as you can see," he continued, "humanity has designed this technology with the understanding that it must be controlled. The device can be turned off at any time." The hologram shimmered again, returning to the image of Captain Davis. Her expression was serene, almost mournful. "The truth is," she said, "we don't wield this power out of recklessness. We wield it because we understand its potential for harm. We control it because we choose to." The silence that followed was deafening. The message was clear. Humanity had not only developed a technology that could change the galaxy, they had also shown an inherent wisdom in its restraint. They had proven themselves capable of holding back power when it was most tempting to unleash it. The Arcturian Chancellor spoke first, his tone quieter than it had been before, no longer dismissive, but respectful. "Impressive," he said. "But a single demonstration does not determine a species' worth. It is your actions, not your technology, that will define your place in the galaxy." Kyle nodded solemnly, acknowledging the gravity of the statement. "I understand, Chancellor, but you will see in the coming days that humanity's actions will speak louder than any device. Our future will not be shaped by fear or greed, but by the choices we make with the power we hold." And with that, the chamber was filled with a different kind of silence, one of respect. The Confederation could no longer deny that humanity had become a force to be reckoned with. But whether that force would be wielded wisely remained to be seen. The council chamber was thick with the weight of anticipation. The atmosphere had shifted. What had once been a place where delegates from across the galaxy convened in sterile diplomacy had now become a stage, a theater of power. And on this stage, humanity was performing a demonstration that would forever alter the Confederation's understanding of them. The previously confident representatives of the Confederation, once secure in their technological superiority and cultural dominance, now exchanged uneasy glances. There was an unfamiliar unease in their demeanor. Earth's demonstration had done more than display strength. It had cast a shadow over their certainties, planting seeds of doubt about their own place in the galaxy. The question had evolved from "what can humanity do?" to "what more does humanity have hidden away, and how much can they truly control?" Kale stood at the head of the table, still and commanding, his figure an embodiment of restrained authority. There was no boast in his stance, no arrogance in his gaze. He understood the stakes. He was not here to overpower or intimidate. He was here to show the Confederation that humanity's true strength lay not in their ability to destroy, but in their ability to choose when to destroy or to create. The Confederation representatives were waiting for the next phase. Their eyes were fixed on Kyle, and the room seemed to grow even quieter, as though the universe itself held its breath. There were no more words to be exchanged. Now it was time for action. Thraxus, the Arcturian Chancellor, sat back in his chair. His fingers were steepled in contemplation, his piercing eyes scanning the room, calculating. His voice broke the silence. "The demonstration you've shown us, General, was unexpected." He paused, his tone sharper than before. "But it doesn't answer all our questions. What is it that Earth has hidden? What more are you capable of?" Hale's eyes remained steady, unwavering, but inside he felt the familiar stir of tension. This was no longer about skepticism. This was about fear, a deeper, more primal fear. The Confederation wasn't just curious anymore. They feared humanity's potential, and that was a fear far more dangerous than mere distrust. Fear forced people into action, But Kyle wasn't here to manipulate that fear. He wasn't here to make threats or promises. He was here to show them that humanity was a force of nature, not a weapon of destruction, but an unpredictable, calculated power that could alter the course of the galaxy. Valira, the Virelian ambassador, spoke next, her voice like ice, colder than before. "You've given us a glimpse, General, but we need more. We need to see your true strength, not just a threat cloaked in mystery." Her words were measured, but there was an edge to them now, an unease that she couldn't fully mask. Her previously dispassionate demeanor had given way to something more raw. Humanity had cracked something in her perception, and it was clear she now regarded them with both fascination and trepidation. Kyle knew that he had to show them not just power, but restraint. The Confederation had to understand that the true strength of humanity wasn't its ability to destroy, but its decision-making. His eyes swept over the room, meeting each delegate's gaze in turn. He had one shot at this, one moment to prove humanity's true nature. With a quiet nod, Kyle gestured toward the central holographic projection. The room fell silent as the projection flickered to life, changing from a view of Earth's surface to an underground facility located in one of the most desolate regions of the planet. A place so isolated that even the Confederation had never caught wind of its existence. The delegates leaned forward, their attention locked onto the feed. The hologram zoomed in on vast underground chambers, each one carefully constructed with immaculate precision. Earth's technology, hidden from the universe for centuries, was now being revealed in front of their eyes. "This is our demonstration." Kyle's voice was calm, almost serene as he spoke. "A demonstration not of power, but of precision, of the ability to control what would otherwise be uncontrollable. Watch carefully, because what you're about to see is a representation of humanity's potential to control the unpredictable." The projection shifted, showing a containment system unlike anything the Confederation had ever witnessed. It wasn't merely a containment device, it was an intricate balance of chaos and order, a paradox of creation and destruction in perfect harmony. The reactor, pulsing with unstable energy, looked like something out of a galactic myth. But what was most unsettling to the delegates wasn't the reactor itself. It was the underlying message humanity was sending. They could control even the most volatile forces in the universe. "This is our solution to the energy crises that plague your worlds," Kel continued, his voice unwavering. "It's not a weapon, but a promise. What you're seeing is a reactor that harnesses energy from the most volatile of elements, a source of boundless power." As the lights dimmed, the projection zoomed in on the reactor's core. It began to pulse with energy, shifting between colors, its internal systems flickering to life. For a moment, it seemed to teeter on the brink of instability, but the sophisticated systems kicked into gear, stabilizing the power. Kale's voice broke through the tension, steady and commanding. "We can shut it down." With a thought. The words echoed through the room. A collective gasp rippled through the Confederation. This wasn't just a reactor, it was an embodiment of control. The ability to harness the power of 1,000 suns, and yet choose when to unleash it, the possibility of creating untold destruction, and the deliberate, terrifying restraint to withhold it. Kyle let the moment hang in the air. This reactor can power an entire sector of the galaxy, and yet we can shut it down without harm, without warning, simply by pressing a button. A decision. We control the energy of 1,000 suns, yet choose when to release it. Valira, who had been sitting, with arms crossed, leaned forward, her cold exterior momentarily betraying a flicker of emotion. "You don't just control energy, you control destruction. You have the ability to create a crisis and avert it at will. How many more such devices do you have, General? How many more cards do you hold in your hand? Kyle's gaze never wavered. The challenge was clear, but he had expected it. He had always known that the Confederation would hunger for more, but they needed to understand something fundamental about humanity's power. It wasn't about dominance. It was about the choice to wield power wisely. This reactor is but one example, Kyle said softly, his voice carrying the weight of his conviction. We could have used it to destroy your fleets, to destabilize your entire power structure in an instant, but we didn't. We chose not to. The room fell into an eerie silence. It was a silence filled with the realization that humanity had shown them something far more terrifying than a mere technological breakthrough. What they had shown was their control over their own impulses, their ability to resist the temptation to dominate. The Confederation, once so certain of their superiority, was now forced to question whether humanity was a threat or a force too unpredictable to control. Valira, perhaps the most formidable of the delegates, was the first to speak, her voice betraying a hint of respect she could no longer hide. You have shown us something incredible, General, but the question still remains. Why have you chosen this path? Why not use this power to dominate, to conquer, to rule? Kyle's gaze remained steady, the fire in his eyes unwavering. He had waited for this moment. He had anticipated the question. It was the only question that mattered now. The answer would define humanity's place in the galaxy, for better or worse. Because we've already won, Ambassador, Kyle said, his words cutting through the room like a blade. We don't need to conquer. We've mastered the art of controlling what others can't. The real power isn't in domination. It's in the choice of whether or not to use it. The room was still. The representatives of the Confederation, once so sure of their own supremacy, were now left to confront a cold truth. Humanity had not only demonstrated its ability to control chaos, it had shown them a new way to think about power. It wasn't in the domination of others. It wasn't in the ability to destroy. It was in the ability to decide when and if to unleash that power. The silence was broken by Thraxos, who stood, his face grim. You've made your point, General. But remember, restraint has its limits, and sometimes those who hold the power to destroy choose to do so. Kyle met his gaze. His voice was calm, unshaken. Then we will be ready, Chancellor. But it will not be our first choice. The finality in Kyle's words hung in the air like a shadow over the room. The Confederation was no longer looking at a species to dismiss or conquer. They were looking at a species that could shape the fate of the galaxy. And that, more than anything else, was what truly terrified them. The council chamber was more subdued than before. The once bustling hum of the Confederation's grand halls had quieted, the air now heavy with contemplation. The representatives, who had once regarded humanity as little more than a curious species, now found themselves grappling with a truth they had long ignored. They had underestimated Earth, but now they were forced to confront the reality that humanity was not just capable of standing on its own. It was a force to be reckoned with. Kyle stood at the front of the chamber, but his stance had changed. No longer did he stand with defiance in his posture as he had in the previous days. Now there was something more, something reserved yet unmistakably powerful. His presence filled the room, but in a way that was measured, as if every inch of his being was aligned with the realization that the confrontation had evolved into something deeper, a negotiation, a reformation, a possible partnership. The Confederation had come to the table expecting to continue their games of political maneuvering. What they had received instead was a revelation, a species that could wield unimaginable power and still choose to remain peaceful, a species that had shown them that true strength wasn't in domination, but in restraint. Valira, the Virelian ambassador, sat back in her chair, her hands folded carefully in front of her. Her icy demeanor had melted, replaced by something far more complex: respect. Her cold eyes, which had once dissected humanity with clinical precision, were now filled with contemplation. She had watched the demonstration carefully, and though her mind still worked through the implications, it was clear that her view of humanity had been irrevocably altered. The cold detachment that had defined the Confederation was beginning to show cracks, and she was one of the first to notice it. Thraxos, the Chancellor of the Confederation, stood by the large viewing screen, his fingers lightly grazing the surface, as though the technology itself might offer answers. His voice, which had once been sharp with suspicion, now carried a weight that was less confrontational and more reflective. The previous arrogance had softened into a quiet, almost reluctant admiration. "You've proven something, General. We underestimated you. We saw your restraint as weakness, but it's clear now that it's not." Cale's gaze did not waver as he met Thraxos's eyes. There was no boastfulness in Cale's demeanor, no triumph in the expression. His stance was one of quiet dignity, an acknowledgement that this was simply the result of what humanity had always been. The Confederation was no longer looking down on Earth. They were now looking at it with newfound respect. "We've always known that our strength isn't just in what we do. It's in what we choose not to do," Kyle said, his voice steady and unwavering, but there was a gravity to it now, something that made it impossible for the room to ignore. "The choice to hold back is as important as the choice to act, and that's what makes us different." Valira's voice came unexpectedly softer now, a stark contrast to her previous cold interrogation. "We made a mistake. In the beginning, we saw your restraint as a form of weakness. It's clear now that it's the opposite. You control your power with precision. You choose when to unleash it. That's something we've never truly understood." Cale could not help but let a faint, almost imperceptible smile tug at the corner of his mouth. It was not one of joy, but one of quiet victory, a recognition that humanity had managed to shift the perception of an entire galaxy with little more than a choice. His eyes did not linger on the smile, though. He turned his focus back to the Confederation, to the dignitaries whose eyes were no longer filled with suspicion, but with a trace of something else, something resembling respect. "We've never wanted to dominate, Ambassador," Cale said, his voice now more than just a statement. It was an invitation. "We've wanted to lead, and to lead, you don't need to be the strongest. You need to be the wisest. The Confederation, as you are now, doesn't see the value in restraint. You see power as something to be wielded indiscriminately, but we understand that true strength comes with the wisdom to choose when not to fight." Thraxos turned away. From the viewing screen, his gaze fixed on Cale. The hardness of his expression remained, but there was an undeniable shift in the way he regarded the human general. The Chancellor had always viewed himself as someone who wielded power with precision, but it was becoming evident that his understanding of power was incomplete. Humanity had shown him that there was more to strength than simply being the one to strike first. Sometimes the greatest strength lay in knowing when to hold back, and yet you have proven to us that, even in the face of unimaginable power, you remain diplomatic. You've shown us a new way forward. But what does this mean for us, General? What are you asking of us? Thraxos asked, the sharpness of his previous tone replaced by a genuine curiosity. He was no longer threatening Kyle, but seeking answers. Kyle's gaze was unwavering, his expression composed. "We are not asking for submission. We are asking for partnership. We are offering you something the Confederation has never known: trust." The words hung in the air, heavy and resonant. Trust. After everything that had transpired, after the threats, the doubts, and the demonstrations of unimaginable power, Kyle was asking for trust. The room fell into a brief, almost uncomfortable Silence. Trust was not something easily offered, especially in a galaxy that had been shaped by power struggles and diplomatic posturing for centuries. Valira stood slowly, the movement deliberate. Her posture was more relaxed now, her gaze no longer cold but warm, thoughtful. What you offer is unprecedented, to trust each other, not out of necessity but because we choose to. Her voice, once sharp and calculating, had softened, taking on a more personal quality. We've been blinded by our own metrics of power. Your offer changes everything. Kale nodded in silent acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving Valira's. The offer of trust was more than a diplomatic gesture. It was a recognition that humanity had proven itself worthy not only of respect, but of alliance. A partnership that transcended simple convenience. It was a profound shift, one that Kale had long hoped for, but never truly believed could be realized so quickly. This is the moment where we redefine what it means to work together, Kale continued, stepping forward, his voice firm but still diplomatic. The power to create and destroy lies in all of us, but it's our choice to act wisely that will shape the future. Thraxos did not respond immediately. His face was unreadable, but there was a spark in his eyes, an understanding that had not been there before. The Chancellor had seen power in one form for so long, power that was exercised through dominance, fear, and strength. But now he saw something else, a power that could be used to guide, to lead, and yes, even to protect without fear of destruction. Finally, the Chancellor of the Confederation, an elder figure with a voice deep enough to command attention, broke the silence. His gaze fell on Kale, and for the first time his voice carried not just authority, but something akin to respect. Perhaps we have been too quick to judge. Perhaps in the end, it is the restraint you show that makes you the true inheritors of the stars. Humanity, it seems, is ready for a role beyond our petty squabbles. The words echoed throughout the chamber, heavy with meaning. The room fell silent once more as the weight of the Chancellor's statement settled over them all. There was no longer any doubt. The Confederation had not only acknowledged humanity's power, it had acknowledged its wisdom. And in doing so, the Confederation found itself on the precipice of something new, something bigger than itself. If we choose to work together, the Chancellor continued, his voice now filled with a quiet resolve, we will need to adapt, to grow. But you have shown us that Earth is no longer a curiosity. It is a beacon, a model for restraint and wisdom. If this is the future, then I say we embrace it. There was no fanfare, no grand gestures of triumph. There was only the quiet understanding that something had changed, profoundly, irrevocably. The Confederation had not just backed down. They had rethought their place in the galaxy. They had come to see humanity not as a threat, but as an equal, a partner in shaping the future, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. Kyle stood there, a quiet figure at the center of the room, surrounded by the representatives who had once doubted him, now silently acknowledging the depth of what he had said. The message had been received, and as he looked around, Kale saw it not just in their words, but in their eyes, the shift from rivalry to something deeper, respect. The final words of the Chancellor, spoken with a new sense of finality, resonated deeply in Kale's mind as they echoed through the quiet chamber. We will work together then, as equals, humanity, the Confederation, and all that we can become. And with that, the stage was set for a new era in the galaxy, one built not on power alone, but on the wisdom to wield it wisely, together. As the council chamber gradually emptied, the echoes of the final words lingered in the air, resonating through the hearts and minds of those who had been present. It was a moment unlike any before it, one where the very foundations of galactic power had been shifted, not by brute force, but by the quiet strength of restraint. Kyle, still standing at the front of the room, couldn't help but feel a subtle weight lift from his shoulders. It was not a weight of victory, for victory had never been his aim. It was a weight of understanding, of clarity that had come after years of conflict and struggle. The Confederation, for all its power and its centuries of dominance, had finally recognized something humanity had known all along. Real strength was not measured by the amount of destruction one could unleash, but by the wisdom to control it. Cale took one last look at the stars outside the chamber's windows. It was always this way, he thought. Distant, unreachable, full of untold possibilities. But now, humanity's place among them had changed. They were no longer just a fledgling species struggling to find its way. They were no longer seen as the unpredictable, volatile new players on the galactic stage. They had earned a seat at the table, not through force or manipulation, but through something far more enduring: respect. The tension that had once defined humanity's relationship with the Confederation now seemed like a distant memory. The walls that had separated them were slowly crumbling, replaced by something deeper, a genuine understanding that the future, for all its uncertainties, would be shaped by cooperation, by trust, and by the shared wisdom of both cultures. For the first time, the Confederation saw humanity as more than just a curiosity. They saw them as equals, as partners with something valuable to offer, not just in the form of technology or military might, but in the ways they viewed power, peace, and progress. As Cale turned to leave the chamber, his gaze briefly caught the eyes of Valera, the Virelian ambassador. Her expression was different now, softer though still guarded, but there was no longer any animosity in her gaze, only an acknowledgement of what had been learned. She had been among the most vocal opponents of humanity's approach, but now she saw it not as a flaw, but as a strength the Confederation had long overlooked. Thraxos, too, met his eyes. The once brash and dismissive ambassador now wore an expression of respect. There was no need for words between them anymore. The shift had happened. The future was already in motion. But the work wasn't over. Far from it. The road ahead would not be easy. The Confederation would need to adapt to this new reality, just as humanity would. Old habits, old mindsets would not vanish overnight. But the seed had been planted. And in the vastness of space, even the smallest seed could grow into something extraordinary. Outside, Cale gazed at the stars once again. They were no longer just distant lights scattered across the sky. They were symbols of hope, of change, and of a future waiting to be shaped. Humanity had shown that it wasn't just about what they could conquer, but about the choices they made. The restraint, the wisdom, the patience, and in that restraint they had earned the Confederation's respect. Cale's mind drifted back to the words of the Chancellor. We will work together then, as equals. It was more than just a promise. It was a new beginning. And for the first time in a long while, Cale felt the weight of the future, both thrilling and daunting, yet full of possibility. As the final few council members filed out, Cale turned back toward the stars, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. The battle, in all its forms, was over. The war of words, of policies, of power had reached its end. And what had emerged from the ashes of that conflict was something far more powerful, the beginning of a new era of cooperation, of unity, and of mutual respect. For Cale, it wasn't just the Confederation that had been changed. It was humanity itself. They had been forced to confront their own flaws, their own desires for power, and in doing so, they had emerged stronger, wiser, more focused, and ready to step into a future that was not defined by domination, but by the wisdom to choose a better path forward. The stars were still there, gleaming in the vastness of space, just as they always had been. But now, humanity had a new place among them, not as an observer, not as a conqueror, but as a partner, a fellow traveler on the road to a better future. And for Cale, That was the greatest victory of all, as the door to the council chamber slid. Shut behind him, he took one last look at the stars. A quiet smile tugged at the corners of his lips, the weight of his journey and the journey yet to come, settling in his chest. The future was theirs. Humanity's, the Confederation's, and every species that would join them on the path forward, and it was a future they would shape together. The council chamber stood still, its grandeur now cloaked in quiet. The once roaring voices of galactic leaders had faded into whispers, and the atmosphere was no longer tense. It was contemplative. The polished obsidian floors, the crystalline data spires humming with residual energy, the suspended starfield above, all bore silent witness to a moment that would be etched into the future memory of 1,000 worlds. Admiral Kyle stood alone beneath the vaulted dome, his silhouette, framed against the vast, living map of the galaxy, displayed above. Stars twinkled, systems pulsed with coded light, trade routes glimmered like threads spun from stardust. For a moment, he didn't feel like a soldier or even a diplomat. He felt like a man who had just changed the course of history. Not with war, not with treaties, but with a choice not to act. He could still see the expressions burned into his memory. Chancellor Roven's furrowed brow slowly lifting into realization. Velira's cold, calculating poise slipping just enough to reveal respect. Thraxos, the warmongering strategist, sitting down in stunned silence after viewing the decrypted holologs, the simulations, the blueprints, the sheer destructive capacity of Earth's dormant technologies that had never been deployed. Not once, because humanity had decided long ago that surviving wasn't enough. Thriving meant becoming better than their past, and better than the systems that once defined strength by devastation. Kyle didn't need validation, but something in him wanted the galaxy to understand. Not fear. Understand. What you build says something about your power. What you don't use says everything about your character. The chamber, once a war theater dressed as a forum, now felt like a sanctum, a sacred space where something ancient and primal had been transformed, fear into trust, power into responsibility. He stepped slowly down the obsidian ramp toward the wide exit doors, each footfall echoing across the silent chamber like a metronome. Not of endings, but beginnings. Behind him, the Confederation's leaders would meet in private rooms. They would whisper about what they had seen. Some would fear it. Others would question its authenticity. But a few, the ones who mattered, would see the truth in it. Humanity had moved beyond the thirst for conquest. Not because they couldn't conquer, but because they had learned how hollow victory tasted when won through annihilation. They had stepped into the galactic arena with calm, not bravado, with warnings, not threats, with open hands, but unshaken resolve. And the galaxy noticed. Across the Confederation, change was already rippling like invisible waves through subspace. Fleets received new orders, border tensions quietly de-escalated, surveillance algorithms were rewritten, old policies, drafted during an age of fear, were suddenly obsolete in the face of something far more radical than aggression: trust, not blind trust. Earned trust. In the weeks that followed, emissaries from planets that had long considered Earth irrelevant requested dialogues. Former rivals sent encrypted messages expressing interest in Earth's philosophy of discipline. Some simply asked for the recordings of Kyle's presentation to show their academies, their students, their children. Even the Veka, once rumored to have aligned with the Warhawks, sent a symbol. A small orb encoded with a single line of text translated into Earth Standard. You are not who we thought you were. You are better. Let us begin again. Back on Earth, the message was celebrated quietly. No fireworks, no gloating, just nods of Relief, of pride, of understanding that the first contact was over, and that it had gone the best way it possibly could have. But Kyle knew better than to celebrate peace too soon. Peace, he had learned, is not a static achievement. It's a muscle, one that needs to be exercised, nurtured, and sometimes protected by the very strength it seeks to transcend. The galaxy would test them again. Some species would not be swayed by philosophy. Others would wait until Earth's back was turned. But now Earth was no longer alone. Allies were forming, not just political ones, ideological ones. Planets and peoples who had been waiting for something different, something to believe in, a model of strength that wasn't soaked in blood, and Earth had offered it, not as a doctrine, but as a living example. Kyle reached the edge of the chamber where the great doors loomed, tall and metallic, etched with the emblems of every Confederation world. Before he stepped through, he turned once more to look back. It struck him that this place, this towering hall of debate and posturing, felt smaller now. Not physically, but symbolically. As if the ideas that once dominated it no longer had the same gravity. A new force had entered the galactic equation, humility. He smiled, not the smile of a victor, but of someone who had witnessed something rare, a turning point that felt like the start of something better. As the doors opened with a low hiss, Kale stepped into the corridor, where Commander Arlen waited silently. Her face was calm, but her eyes held the question she didn't need to speak. Kyle answered anyway. "It worked," he said softly. "Not all at once, but it worked." She nodded. "And the others? They'll follow, or they'll fade. Either way, we keep moving forward." They walked together down the corridor, their boots tapping lightly against the alloy floor. Outside, through the wide observation windows, Earth's ambassadorial fleet waited. Ships built not to intimidate, but to inspire. Their hulls gleamed in the light of the nearest star, reflecting not weapons, but hope. "Where to next?" Arlen asked. Kyle looked out at the galaxy, a quiet fire in his eyes. "Home, first," he said, "then everywhere else. Because now, Earth wasn't just a planet, it was a beacon, and the stars were